Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hyvää huomenta kaikille. God morgon till alla. And I'm very happy to see you all here and warmly welcome to the meeting on environmental footprint. Or actually, it's a conference with big C letter, because now we are in a phase where the pilot phase is over. We are going to hear today what's happening next, what's it all about, what's environmental footprint, and how we are going to go further. So we have very many experts and specialists today talking about the future and the vision. Will there be big logos and footprints in supermarkets? How will it affect the enterprises? How will it affect public procurement? What about eco-design? There are a lot of varieties how eco-labeling or footprinting might also influence eco-labeling. So today we maybe become more wiser and we get inspired by all the possibilities. And now I have a pleasure to introduce you Mrs. Anne-Mari Virolainen, Finnish Minister for Foreign Trade. And she's an MP since 2007. She has a background not only in politics, but she's been also working with ICT technology in different enterprises. And one exciting thing, she knows about footprinting because she has been chair of Finnish Eco-Labeling Board, which has been representing both Nordic Swan label and EU environmental, or eco-label, EU eco-label actually in short. So please, Anne-Mari Virolainen, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, and thank you, Taina, for your kind words. It's a pleasure to open this Nordic Environmental Footprint Conference. Its central theme, the environmental footprint of products and services, supports the Sustainable Development Goal number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Environmental degradation, climate change, population growth, and the depletion of natural resources pose huge challenges for humanity. Resource scarcity is a major concern, and it has been estimated that within the next 30 years we will have to manage with one-tenth of the current resources. It's evident that the current high consumption, high waste lifestyles are unsustainable. In 2018, the global overshoot day fell on August 1st. Unfortunately for Finland, it fell already on April 11th. In the quest for solutions, the slogan "less is more" is getting new meanings. We need to increase the efficiency and productivity of the resources that we use. We must do more with less. We also need to rethink three things. First, how products and services are designed and produced. Second, what materials and resources are used for them. And third, how the circulation of materials and products can be increased. While rethinking our own production and consumption patterns, we also have the responsibility to support the developing countries as they aim for more sustainable development paths. Finland promotes this goal in the framework of the United Nations Environmental Programme. The EU Action Plan for Circular Economy strives for a transition where the value of products, materials and resources is maintained in the economy for as long as possible and waste is minimized. This requires changes in the whole value chains and in consumer behavior. However, while the European Union and national authorities have an enabling role in the transition, the key actors in the process are businesses and consumers. Within this process, environmental footprint can become an important instrument for enhancing the ecological design of products and services and for communicating about the environmental impacts of them. More and more companies are including corporate responsibility and sustainability into their core businesses. They do this to respond to the needs and expectations of stakeholders, but also because they believe sustainability is good for business. One of the major challenges that companies face is taking care of the supplier responsibility. Tracking the social and environmental impacts of a supply chain is a demanding task, especially in the global markets. If it is difficult for companies, it is also difficult for consumers. I do believe that there are many consumers who wish to engage in more sustainable consumption. However, many people simply do not know how to proceed. It can be difficult to find information or to understand it. On the other hand, it can be hard to judge whether one should trust the information available or the claims presented. Also, it is difficult to compare the products. There certainly is a need for reliable and transparent information. Fortunately, the European Commission, in collaboration with over 260 organizations, has responded to this need by developing the methods and rules for product environmental footprints and organization environmental footprints. This opens an array of possibilities for promoting circular economy. The idea of using environmental footprints as a product passport has been proposed. To stimulate the market, communication plays a key role. The experiences from the Nordic Swan or the European Flower Ecolabel will be useful when planning how to create awareness and help consumers to make informed choices. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by underlining the importance of the Sustainable Development Goal number 12. People will continue to consume. The challenge is to create policies that enable circular economy and sustainable consumption and production. Environmental footprints can be one of these instruments. Now is the time to make the most out of them. I wish you all a very successful and rewarding conference. I'm also looking forward to reading the conference proceedings to learn more about this important instrument, as well as about the future prospects for its application. Thank you very much.
Now we don't have time or floor for discussion or questions for the minister because there's the budget negotiations waiting for her. But we can start our day by sort of getting a few insights on the environmental footprint. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to Joachim Judl, who will present our kind of digital version for discussion and voting. Slido, and he will tell you how you can participate. Of course, we want that you participate also lively, make questions, and present your comments, but you can also post your questions, comments, or ideas via Slido. But Joachim will present how it works. I don't know about the system or approach.
Thank you. At this event, we would like to engage you in discussion. Of course, as Laina said, we will come live questions, but maybe those of you who don't want to ask aloud or maybe want to ask anonymously, we have this tool called Slido. Just go to slido.com on your smartphone or tablet or your computer. Enter the event hashtag Nordic PEF 2018, and you'll be in the platform where you can ask questions. Throughout the event, we will be showing a couple of polls that you can interact with us, and I strongly encourage you to join us to ask questions, because only by that we will get to know what is in your minds. So, thank you.
Thanks, Joachim. So be active, post comments and questions. And next guest speaker is Michele Galatola from the EU Commission, who is, I would say, the Mr. Environmental Footprint. He's the expert behind this process or innovation or the methodology with his team. And now I give the floor to Michele. You will tell us more about how we actually, or how the environmental footprint actually came to the discussion inside the EU. Okay, welcome. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting again me to one of these conferences. It's always a pleasure to come back to the Nordic countries, because I know how much you have been following the process and how much you have been supporting the process. When I talk about support, I don't necessarily mean only positive messages, but some of the critics' voices come from this part of Europe, and the constructive criticism is always very appreciated, as I keep saying, keep saying during this process. So thank you again for that. What I want to talk to you today is a bit of mixed things, a bit of things that you probably already know, and maybe also some new things, or at least a different way of looking at certain issues. I will not too much go maybe into the future policy making, unless you are really interested into that. Maybe we can leave that for the question and answer. We keep hearing talking about circular economy. Circular economy has been the branding of this Commission when it comes to environmental policies and industrial policies in the last 5 years. And surely it is something that has functioned quite well from the marketing point of view. I mean, everybody's talking about circular economy, not only in Brussels, but also elsewhere. Industry is talking about circular economy. Outside Europe, they are talking about circular economy, when in reality, this concept is nothing new. I mean, something that we've all been talking about and speaking about. I remember 30 years ago when I was studying at university, it was already talking about the 3R concept in Japan. I mean, we haven't reinvented the wheel. I mean, the wheel is still the same. We are just trying to market it different, so to keep the item I in the agenda. And we will continue working on circular economy also in the future. Already now in Brussels, we are starting to think about next action, and we talk about circular economy 2.0. So the branding was so successful that now we are keeping it and just adding a number behind. But the reality of circular economy is such a straightforward concept that is really amazing sometimes to think that it has not already been implemented everywhere. because it's just about bringing the life cycle considerations in the way you manage your company, in the way you manage your house, I would say, in the way you manage your country. So what we are just doing when implementing circular economy is to think about how to optimize every single step in the life cycle stages of a product or an organization. And now we are also talking about financing and implementing this concept in financing, for example. And this is a nice exercise because it brings you to two considerations. On one side, it helps you to enlarge your vision and to understand that not necessarily the things that you can do are the things that you can manage. So this is stressing more and more the concept of value chain management rather than only your company management. And the other thing that it brings in is that it kind of reminds of the second principle of thermodynamics that says that you cannot preserve things forever. There is a certain moment in time when recycling is not possible anymore, or when recycling or recovery is not even optimal from an environmental viewpoint. Let's not talk for now about the economic point of view, but let's focus on environment. So it is very important, this concept, from the pedagogical point of view. And I think this is one of the things that we have learned also in Commission, and we are trying to implement more and more. But the whole talks about footprint, I mean, we have been thinking a lot about products. But in reality, by doing that, we have also somehow lost the wider picture. I remember maybe 10 years ago, there was a lot of talks about decoupling, absolute decoupling, relative decoupling, and then we kind of lost that, or it became less evident in the political agenda. Why in reality, decoupling is at the end what we are all aiming at. And if we are honest with ourselves, decoupling is also where we are failing. Because when we look at numbers, I will show you some graphs now, but we don't have time to dig into that. While it is true that the relative decoupling is maybe happening in some sectors, the absolute decoupling is not, because consumption is increasing much more than what we can reduce in improving in production. But the reason why I'm showing you this slide is because what I'm going to talk to you today, so the environmental footprint, the life cycle assessment, is something that now we are able to bring again back into the picture of the decoupling, because the methods that we have developed can help to have a new way of looking at this concept, a new way of monitoring the decoupling. When you look at this, I'm not asking you to look at to read the graph, but the idea there is that we are rightly putting a lot of emphasis on climate change. And we all know, and also in the news of yesterday, we have seen how much nature is reminding us about the consequences of our action. So it is absolutely necessary that we focus on climate change. But if we, again, bring in the life cycle assessment and life cycle thinking, knowing that there is much more than climate change in terms of environmental impact, then we will see, you can't see, but trust me in what I'm saying, that the decoupling is working kind of okay for climate change, but when you take into consideration the other impacts, is not working at all. So the real risk that we might be facing is that we are taking care of one impact and going to produce damages on others, and when we will realize that, it might be even too late for that one. Then, of course, I was saying that in terms of relative decoupling, so the decoupling against the relative reduction of environmental footprint, at country level, we are not doing that bad if we look at the domestic footprint, which is what a lot of governments are doing. They're saying, oh, look, I have reduced so much my climate change, and they show graphs like this. There you can find European countries. Finland, where is Finland? Let me see, I can't see it now. It's on the right, so it's doing well. Well, not that well, in the sense that GDP is increasing, but the impacts are increasing at higher rate. So we're not doing that well, according to these statistics. But this is only the domestic part. So basically, this is the part of what you produce. But if you want to have a real picture, then you have to look at the consumption footprint. The consumption footprint takes into account also the things that you import and the products that you export. So the reason why a lot of countries are doing well is because in reality they have been delocalizing a lot of their production. And of course, by delocalizing, you don't account anymore for the emissions for those products. So if you take into account the consumption footprint, then you, and confronting this graph with the one before, then you would see that the situation is a little bit different and even more complex. Unfortunately, for Finland, it's not going to change much. But for some countries that look very well on the domestic footprint, they wouldn't score that well on the consumption footprint. So this is just to send again the message that implementing the life cycle assessment and thinking is something that we need even beyond the only product-related policies. It's something that we have to bring in all the sort of policies we do, including trade, including innovation policies. Then, now that I gave you the first flavor of what we can do with the tools that we have developed, let's go back in history and let's remind why we have done all that. Why the Commission has invested, someone in this room might say wasted 8 years of time in doing this. It was an original request from industry. And again, this is something that I keep repeating because someone tends to forget that. There was a real need from our European industry to face the issue that there was a proliferation of labels and methods at European level. Now, you are in an happy part of Europe because you have a European label that is very well known, that works very well, the Nordic one. And so you know that you have a label you can trust. That's not the reality in other parts of Europe. In other parts of Europe, there are not strong national labels, and even the EU label is not very well known. So in those countries, citizens, consumers, and people doing business-to-business transactions, they are faced with a plethora of labels that are not really reliable, and this has been proven by studies. And this led some member states to take action to start promoting legislation, trying to put a stop to this phenomenon. And France was one of the first in 2010 to come up with the Grenelle legislation. And don't get me wrong, that was actually a very good thing, because that was a member state replying to a real problem for their citizens, substituting something that Europe was not yet able to do. Because the subsidiarity principle allows the member states to step in when there is nothing comparable at European level. I say the proliferation of label. The last statistics talks about 460 environmental labels, and they are increasing. There is no trend of decreasing in the number of labels. And we know, as I said, by studies, that a vast majority of them are not reliable, they are not verifiable, or they are incomplete. And that is why industry understood that there was room for maneuver there. In the bad and in the good sense. So during the period of the crisis, the industries that were using environmental or social labels, and I'm talking about the period 2011-2013, they increased their revenues on average by 7%, when their competitors not using those labels were at best increasing by 1%, but many of them were actually losing money. And we have seen the same for organizations. So organizations having real sustainability plans, they were more solid on the stock market, and they had overall better economic performance. And I'm stressing the word real sustainability plans, because a lot of industry makes statements like, I hope nobody in the room has done something like that, saying sustainability is in our DNA, where sustainability is only in their public speeches. When you look at the things that they really do, there is not so much sustainability there. And the problem is that sustainability is something that pays off in the long term. So if you're only interested in your next year change in revenues, probably a sustainability plan is not going to deliver that. If you're looking for long-term financial viability and credibility and branding strengthening, then it's probably sustainability is the right answer. I say the jungle of labels. As you see, the statistics says that they have been increasing 143% in the last 13 years. And we know that consumers want to buy green. All Eurobarometers confirm that. Up to 95% they want to do that. And some of them are starting to be faced with misleading claims. We keep saying that they are up to 95%, again, the same number comes back. Up to 95% of green claims can be false or wrong. It's an incredibly high number. And people are starting to be confronted with that, even if when you look at how many complaints the citizens are bringing forward, there are not so many. Because legislation was not really inducing people to complain. Now with the new consumer deal that we have adopted with the Commission, this will become easier, mass actions will become possible, so things might change in that direction. And I mean, the Dieselgate is just the top of the iceberg. We know that there is much more behind that is not yet visible. So this is why the European Commission developed the footprint methods, to bring more clarity for citizens and also to offer new business opportunities to the companies that want really to work on improving the sustainability of their supply chain. And why we had to come with something new. I mean, for those of you who are experts or have been doing LCA, you are probably very familiar with this concept. I mean, some of our critics, they keep saying, but you already have the ISO standard, everything is already there. So why you just don't use the ISO standard, or why you don't use the other methods that were there? I mean, and we are, thanks to God that there is ISO standard. That was an excellent starting point. But each standard, each method is meant to deliver certain objectives. The ISO standard is meant to bring the whole industry in a concept and help them growing, implementing that concept. But that is not enough when you want them to implement that into policy making in things that might change how the market works. Because in order to do that, you need behind a standard or a technical method that is extremely clear and strict in the requirement. Something that, again, by the nature of other standards was not needed, and that's the reason why it was not there. So it's not a criticism towards how ISO works. Without ISO, we wouldn't be here today. It's just to understand that each standard has to be seen in the perspective of what it can deliver by nature. And at that time, even doing studies on the very same product, like, I mean, this glass, plastic glass, you would get completely different results, because there was too much flexibility in terms of methods, databases, assumptions, and other things. And of course, that is the nightmare scenario for a policymaker, because in policymaking, but also in industry, you need reliability and you need to make long-term plans. You cannot have something that changes the picture every 6 months. That's absolutely something you don't want. So we try to intervene in that. And that's why we, together with JRC, the Joint Research Center, which is a scientific branch of the Commission, but I want also to say, together with the vast majority of the LCA brains working in Europe and outside Europe, this has been an incredible effort. We really have been working, discussing for hours, sometimes in a nice way, sometimes in a harsh way, because we all wanted to deliver the best results possible. So by having all these people together, the experts, some NGOs, member states, and a lot of industries, you will see in the coming slide, we put forward these methods. And these methods can really deliver a lot of things that we wanted to have. They are not perfect, far from that. But raise your hand, the one who knows the perfect method. I mean, perfection, you know, is the enemy of the good. And that, at the end of the day, is the big question that we will have to answer at the policy making, and that industry is already answering on our behalf. Do we want to wait for perfection, or we want to take action based on the best available practice that we have? So what the EF methods, I'm saying EF because we have the product and the organization methods, so they're similar but different. What do they bring? They bring reduction in cost relating to similar methods. I was claiming this since the very first day, because in my mind, this was going to be one of the results. Now we have the numbers to confirm that. Comparing two studies on the same product, one done with the traditional methods and one done with PEF, we have a reduction of cost up to 90%, 90. It's incredible. It brings reduction of costs in the way you manage your value chain. We are already seeing a lot of, I would say some, not a lot, but they are increasing industries that are starting to use this in their value chain, and they are already claiming reduction and improvement on how they manage their suppliers. This is bringing access to new market and finance opportunities. This is still something to come, but I think we are seeding the possibility for this to happen in the coming years. It's clear, it's simple, and provides comparable information. I was talking to the minister just before starting, and she was asking me an example of how we can bring this message clearly. And one of the things I do, I keep providing the message of the clock. You need the clock because you need to have a simple, clear information, immediate, that you do see. Okay, I don't have a clock, but you do that, and you see what you need to know. And that's for the final user is all that you need. You don't need to know the complexity that is behind the work. Someone else has worked that complexity for you. In EF, it's exactly the same. At the end, we can deliver a very simple information that has behind it a lot of complexity that's been dealt with. And it's one single method. And this is really something that member states should love to have, and for sure industry love to have. They want to have harmonization. It's clear that at least the front runners, they don't want to compete anymore on who has the best method. They understood that now they need to compete on who has the best performance. And we are seeing that happening in reality. And using PEF, you have information that is more traceable. Traceability is a big issue. I mean, it's not a solved issue, I would say. Far from that. I think there we need more innovation, we need digitalization, we need, I don't know if blockchain is an answer to that. There is a heated debate on if we can bring something to environment or not, to be seen. But digitalization of information is something that we need, is something that is happening in the construction sector, for example, with EPDs, and I think that is the way forward. We have a strong third-party verification system that is, has been developed during this pilot phase, and we are providing information that consumer authorities and investors can trust. And for example, the interest of the finance community of banks in this field is showing again the appetite for something that might work on a wider scale. Just to give you an example, Friday I will be in Rotterdam, invited to a meeting of the European central banks with all the national banks exactly to talk about this. So we work with industry, I said. We started with 27 sectors, about 50% food, the rest non-food. 14 of them have completed their job in time by April this year. Again, congratulations to them. Some more will complete their work in the November session. And these are the ones that you see represented in coming in autumns. You will hear after me the leader of one of these working groups that will finish in November, hopefully successfully, the photovoltaic product group. 5 of them, which I didn't put in the slide, didn't manage it. And again, that is part of the success of this pilot phase. Because if everybody makes it, it means that the system doesn't work. It means that the system is too simple. I mean, the other day, I had a meeting with an industry. I cannot name the sector. But they told me, oh, we have our internal standard about environmental proficiency and efficiency. And I said, okay, very good. Tell me how is the standard. And then they explained me the standard. And then I said, okay, how many of your industries pass this standard? And they say, oh, about 95% of them. Then maybe the standard is not that good or is not that tough. So the fact that 5 sectors, for different reasons, didn't manage to finalize the project means that the project has been built in the right way. It's been built to identify those that are trying to bend the rules. It has been built in a way to identify the sectors where the data are not good enough. It has been built in a way to identify where the different agendas between competitors is so different that actually an agreement is not possible. Because when you see there all these sectors, that doesn't mean that 1 or 2 companies for that sectors were represented. For each of them, one of the requirements was to have at least 51% of the European market-based sector working. So competitors had to sit together and work together. And in the end, the average market representativeness for each sector was around 2/3 of the market. So it was a huge implication of industry, huge involvement of industry. And most of them are still happy about what we did, incredibly. Which is the reason why somebody says that this method doesn't work, because if industry support it, it means there's something wrong. I mean, this is something I've really heard in Brussels, people saying, it's amazing. Anyway, what's new in PEF? I don't think I will have time to dig into that, so I just put this slide as a reminder. One of the concepts that I really want to stress, maybe it will be the only one that I will stress today, is the materiality approach. Materiality approach is nothing new to people who have been doing seriously LCA. It's something that some people don't want to really implement. Materiality means the Pareto principle. For those of you who have studied economics, you know that Pareto says something like 80% of things that happen are caused by 20% of the reason of the drivers. That's exactly can be replicated when it comes to environmental performance of a supply chain, for example. Independently of how complex is your product, 80% of the impacts are caused by 20% of the processes along the supply chain. What that means? That means that you don't need to look into every single detail when you make a study. It's sufficient that you get high quality primary company specific information on those 20% of processes, which means on average 20, 30 processes. And you can use good quality secondary data for all the rest. And this is one of the things that brings down cost. It also means that if you want to be serious about producing information that is relevant, you don't need to look into the things that are perceived as being important, because perception is sometimes right and often wrong. I mean, if you want to be scientific about the impacts, there is a way to do that, but that means that you can really focus on the things that really matters. Finding out that some of the things that we have been preaching as being relevant because our citizens want that, consumers want that, NGOs expect that, at the end of the day are not relevant from an environmental viewpoint. Now, we can accept that and we can say, okay, I know, but I still want to do other things. Fine. But at least we know that now we have a tool that can pinpoint where are the really important things and where are not. I will skip some slides to recover some time. So in the end, what we do is that we have a very detailed document. We are now writing the revised version after the pilot phase, and I'm fighting with my team to bring down the number of pages, because they start saying, oh, it will be something around 400, 500 pages. Oh my God, I say, nobody's going to read that. So we are trying to bring it down. Let's see how good we can do. But what is in there is basically every single step that you need to perform when doing a serious study. There will be a clear description on how to do that. And it's done in a way that people will do it more or less in the same way. That means that the reproducibility and the comparability of the studies will be something that none of the other standards would allow. And again, for reasons that I try to explain, it's not a problem of the standards. We're just not meant to deliver this reproducibility and comparability. So all this information will be included in a document that is called, for products, PEFCR, that stands for Product Environmental Footprint Category Rules. Andreas, after me, will provide maybe some example from the photovoltaic one. And so this is the kind of a little reference point for those products that you want to do the studies for. So what are the things, as I said? One important thing is the most relevant impact. In PEF, we can look up to 16 different impacts. And we know and we have seen by experience that 3 or 4 of them are really relevant for the different product groups. They are not always the same. They change from product group to product group, as it should be. But it's rare the case when there are more than 4. So you can focus on them. This is just one example that I've taken from the batteries, PEFCR. Again, don't look at the numbers, just to reinforce the concept I'm saying. For them, the 4 most relevant ones are climate change, resource use, minerals, resource use, energy carriers, and particulate matter. For clarity, you might notice, and the more experts know, that toxicity is not included. So here you see 13 impact categories. We have, I said, 16. We have 3 toxicity impact categories that we took out from the picture during the pilot phase, because thanks to this pilot phase, we had evidence that the method that we were proposing was not strong enough. So we have started from there, learning from there. We have involved in huge work, GRC again, with industry and with ECA, here in Helsinki. And now they have nearly completed, they are going to release soon, the new characterization factor for toxicity. So now we will have toxicity method much stronger than before, much more reliable than before. So in the transition phase that I will explain, it will start soon, toxicity will be back in the picture. Then, as I said, another thing we can deliver is the most relevant life cycle stage. This is information mostly used in business-to-business transaction and to understand where you should act to improve your performances. And this is the equivalent for batteries. So you will see that depending on the typology of batteries, it's of course the raw material acquisition that is very important for them. Or like, for example, transport is not important. And this is, just talking about transport, this is another of the myths that we were able to prove wrong. Let's talk about food, for example. I've heard a lot of discussion about, oh, we should only take food that is coming from nearby, the famous 0-kilometer approach, saying that if food comes from the other part of the world, it's so bad for environment. Well, we have proven that with very few exceptions, distribution does not matter. It's not that is going to provoke the main impacts. Impacts are coming from somewhere else. There are specific situations where kilometer 0 is really the best solution. But again, it's a case by case. It's not a general thing that kilometer 0 is better. And I mean, the famous story about the tomatoes grown in Netherlands compared to tomatoes in Spain is one example of, that proves that. Then we can identify, as I said, the most relevant processes. And this is where really industries start to understand the value of these actions. And this is, for example, very important also for those who do eco-label. Because here it tells you exactly where in supply chain the impacts are coming from and where you should act if you want to improve them. And for example, for PM, so for particulate matter and for batteries, you can see that depending on which kind of battery you are producing, you can decide to act on a specific process. And that gives you a lot of flexibility that again is something that industry want to have. Because let's imagine you're in a situation where you want to change, let's see, for example, what? The cobalt content, I don't know, of your battery. Then basically you have 3 options there from an industry perspective. You can decide to work on your process if you are managing the cobalt to reduce the impact there. You can decide to change your design of your battery if you want to get rid of your cobalt, or you can decide to work on your suppliers. Basically looking who can supply you that process, that product, that material, and putting them in competition to deliver you the best possible product from an environmental perspective. And this is what for example, what some retailers are starting to do. This is, for example, something that the apparel sector is starting to do. So they are bringing environmental features as an element of competition also between their suppliers, which I think that if it is done in the right way, could really improve the situation. And then the other thing that you can have, still stay on the battery example, is, okay, a quantification of the impact. And we are talking about potential impact. That doesn't mean that these are the real impacts. It means that there is an approximation of what could be the impact for that product. And you can add the impacts because these are calculated through a normalization and weighting approach. So you can add them and you can have the famous, infamous total score. Now, again, there is where kind of religion pops in, because there are people who really love the single score and there are people who really hate the single score. We are not taking a position. We are just saying with the methods you can have the single score. Then how you use it, if you want to use it, is up to you, but at least there is transparency. Because in a lot of systems today there is already weighting. All the monothematic labels are and implicitly doing weighting. I mean, a label doing carbon footprint is doing weighting. It's just giving all the impacts to climate change. What we are doing is we are still using weighting, but in a transparent way so people know what is the weight that has been assigned to the different impacts. And then when you have the weight, the total weight, or even the weight for the single impacts, you might start thinking of using that, for example, to develop GPP criteria, eco-design criteria, eco-label criteria, and the more the merrier. One thing that I would like to just to mention is the importance of data. When doing LCA, you know that the database that you use is of essential importance. What we have seen and confirmed is that there is no perfect database. All databases have margins for improvements, and I think they are improving their data also thanks to this experience. And in particular, the issues related to time, geography, and technology representativeness are of key importance. What we brought in the discussion is that before people were talking about quality in a kind of qualitative way, in general terms, now we are bringing the concept of quantification of that quality. And again, this brings transparency, because what is happening in reality is that as all the data providers have to quantify the quality of each single data set, then the competitors is starting to look into that and saying, oh, look, but this cannot be true. And so there's this kind of competition that is also starting. This is the healthy competition that can lead to improvements. And we have, as Commission, supported the development of what we call the environmental footprint compliance data sets, and we have done that for all the sectors that you can see listed here. It's about 9,000 data sets. And what is the novelty? And this is again the little things of I'm proud of with my team and with the institution I work for, is that for the first time we are making available to everybody in the world and for absolutely free the access to these data sets. Until yesterday you had to pay even a good amount of money to have access to data sets. Now you will have for free about 9,000 data sets available, and you will be able to download them from the websites that are listed there. We have been working on verification. I say that verifiability and traceability is a big issue for all legislations that we have. We know that market surveillance is an issue. We know that ex-ante verification is an issue. And as I said, we haven't solved that, because that requires a much more systemic solution. But at least we have developed a method or an approach that is consistent for the different products. So each product group will be looked at in the same way. That should at least not increase the cost, if not bring them down, but at least not increase them. And for now, until there is a legislation, of course, everything is free. I mean, everything is not free. Everything, you can do things as you want, but once, if and where there will be legislation, then we will also legislate on that. Maybe going through an accreditation system. That is the prevailing opinion. Now, some of the criticism. I mean, I could make a full lecture on the criticism, but I will just focus on a few examples. People say, oh, you don't talk about biodiversity. I mean, how many times have, I'm sure I will hear today again, just to prevent that. We don't talk about biodiversity in the sense that there is no impact category named biodiversity. True. Why is that? I can explain you. We have 16 impact categories. And differently from some private methods, we just didn't invent a method and put it there. We are only using methods that have been discussed at international level, that have been going through international stakeholder consultation, that have been approved at international level. The reason why there is no biodiversity impact category is because there is no agreement at international level about how to look at biodiversity from an LCA viewpoint. There is work ongoing. The United Nations Environment Life Cycle Initiative is working on that. That is an initiative the Commission is part also of. The FAO LEAP initiative is looking to that. So as soon as we will have an internationally agreed method, then we will use it. But we will not use a company method or a consultant method, as some others are doing. That's not the way we want to work. We want to work through transparent international consensus. But we are still looking at biodiversity from a proxy viewpoint. Because if you look at the impact categories in red, 8 out of 16 are very good proxies for biodiversity. So, again, I don't think that is a real criticism. If you want to criticize PEF, there are other things to say, but not really biodiversity. Well, these are already mentioned. There are one specific NGO and some other representative. They are saying you should never use LCA for information to consumer. I mean, we just disagree. I mean, I cannot say that they are wrong, but they are not surely not right from my personal viewpoint. It's something that it can be or it cannot be. There is no way of proof one or the other correct. We think that before was not a good decision because of all the weaknesses in the method. I think that now we have all the tools to start using LCA indicators and communicate them to people. That doesn't mean that you have to provide to people 16 numbers or 16 indicators. Again, you can communicate only on the most relevant things, or you can even think of communicating with a single indicator. We have, I don't remember if I have slides today, but we have done a lot of surveys and work on communication, and it's clear that what the consumers want is something that can simply understand. They love the traffic light system. It's very simple, but it is really the things that people love most. And second in class is the impact categories with the letters, A, B, C, D, E. And then only after they want to hear about numbers, but they don't really understand numbers. So there is a way to provide simplified information. Remember the watch. We can deliver simplified information if we don't compromise on the complexity behind. Okay, this one I really don't want to comment. PEF will increase costs for companies, especially SMEs. As I said, we have the proof that we can bring down cost, direct cost up to 90%. So in the end, conclusions. We think we have a smart, or we have an enabler for a smart green revolution, where the smart is this time declined in a different way compared to the traditional smart acronym. So we bring in simplification, we bring in meaningfulness, we bring in applicability, we'll bring in reproducibility and total cost reduction. So what happens now? Footprint pilot phase is over. Technically will be over in November, but I mean, we call it over now. We are analyzing the results. We are discussing internally the results. We are starting to look at how we can implement these in existing or, if needed, in new legislation. And we are starting at the same time what we call the transition phase. The transition phase has 3 major objectives. First, we will monitor the implementation of the 21 methods, PEFCR that we have developed in real practice. So we'll see what industry does with them and where are the problems in implementing them. We will keep working on improvement of the methods, because as I said, we are far from perfection. We know, for example, that we have to work better and more on agricultural modeling. That is one of the weaker points of our methods. We know that we have to go back to the issue of allocation of emissions for the cattle and the animals. That was one of the fighting points during the pilot phase. And there are other things that we want to work. For example, we want to work on a system to reduce the cost of verification by verifying the system and not verifying the single product, like verifying more the software and how the calculations are done. That is not going to replace the traditional audit system, but will bring down a part of the cost. And then we want to reopen the possibility of developing new PEFCR or FSR for industry. There is a lot of interest still there for industry sectors that were not covered during the pilot phase, that they want to start doing this work because they really see the benefit of that. certain sectors, as I said, already implementing it. Next week I will be in Milan, in Linea Pelle, where the whole leather sectors will present their work. And what is already happening today in Italy is that the major brands working with leather, they are starting to ask to the different tanneries to produce information through the PEFCR on leather, because they want to see how is their performance, and they want to start maybe choosing their suppliers also based on that performance. From the policy, I'm sure you want to ask, you will ask. So from the policy perspective, as I said, we are looking into that. We need to work our homework first before coming to take decisions. The timing is probably not the best one to have a proposal right now, because, as you know, very soon there will be elections in the European Parliament, so the current Commission will expire. And it is a normal tradition that the current Commission does not take political commitments for the future Commission. So from the time perspective, we don't have enough time to make the analysis, discuss with stakeholders, do the impact assessment, and present a full-fledged policy proposal. So this will probably not happen with this Commission, but for sure it is the intention to do the preparatory work so that the new Commission will have all the information needed to take wise decisions. Probably don't have time to comment on that. Then I will immediately go to the thank you. This is a part of my team. They have been done a hell of a work, so I want to praise them every time I can. Thank you very much for your attention.
Michele, thanks a lot. Could you still maybe stay on the stage, because we have lots of interesting questions, both concerning the future and the methodology and many other issues, and we could make one or two questions and then continue with Andreas Vade's presentation. But because there were lots of similar questions from the audience, so we could just go briefly through some of the questions. And maybe the key interest is, do you think that PEF will be, or environmental footprinting will be replacing the existing labels? That's the question that many have. Yes, if you maybe stay there, or...
It is a good tradition to start with an easy question, but this...
Yeah.
Okay, but that depends. The point is that PEF is not meant to be a label. We never meant to do this work to create a label. I know that, I think in 2011, we had a study looking at how a PEF label might look like, and from then people started to understand that that was the intention of the Commission. And I keep saying that that is not true. Because our intention when it comes to the EU Eco label, for example, is to see how PEF can make that label stronger and more reliable and more interesting for industry. At the same time, we have two other issues to solve, because the single market for green product communication, that was the one announcing the PEF for EF in 2013, it started from the statement, in Europe there are too many labels and too many systems, so it wouldn't match so well. Then the final solution is to bring another label. You know, it's a little schizophrenic, so I wouldn't favor that. At the same time, the problem is still there, and it's even increasing. So we need to find a way somehow to, on one hand, reduce the total number of labels, and on the other hand, to increase the reliability of the existing labels. And that is where I think the challenge is not so much on us, but is also on the eco-label community. It's up to them to decide if they want to defend the status quo, and so to play a conservatory approach, or if they want to innovate their labels to achieve these objectives. Our objective, as I said, is to reduce number of labels and to strengthen their reliability. And our intention is to do that through the existing ISO Type 1 labels. If for whatever reasons that will not be possible because the other counterpart does not want to get into that direction, then I guess as policymaker it will be our duty to rethink if other solutions then are needed.
Mm-hmm. And that's a question also for many of you, because some of you are working with eco-labels, of course, with also other policy tools. So actually the Commission is inviting you to also get involved with the environmental footprint methodology and in the discussions about the future. Then we had some questions on qualifications. What kind of qualification does an organization, an enterprise making a PEF need? Do you need to be an LCA expert? And then there were discussions or questions on how can you make benchmarks for different enterprises of different products, because the enterprises are so different.
Okay, the qualification one. To do a PEF study, we don't prescribe any specific qualification ourselves. It's clear that if you're not an LCA expert, it will hardly be possible to do a PEF study. I have to confess that was one of the little failures. We started saying we want to bring something that even the layman can understand. We wrote them in the first version of our guide, and then we had to realize that that is basically not possible. I mean, you cannot simplify too much something that is so complex as modeling the economy and the world. So we gave up on the concept of bringing something that is too simple. The qualifications that we have are more on the reviewer and the verifier side. There we have a clear table that prescribe the years of experience that you need in 3 fields. It's the field of the LCA, is in the field of the industry, specific industry expertise, and then as an auditor or reviewer verifier. That we have that table that is still voluntary, but probably will be the starting point if we go to a standardization process or an accreditation process. So that will be the starting point. When it comes to the benchmark, that is a very interesting question. Let's start saying that for organizations, for now, we are not promoting the concept of comparison of organizations. And that is not necessarily because we think it's not possible, it's rather because we don't have enough knowledge and experience on that. We only had 2 of the pilots that were on organizations, one on retailers, one on copper extraction. And so we don't have enough information. We think, I mean, what we see is happening in other contexts, like I was mentioning the financing. I mean, the stock market, they have their comparison system based on environmental performance, usually carbon footprinting and the turnover. So they link these 2 information, they come to some kind of comparison of companies. Maybe that is the avenue for the future, but for now we are not proposing that, because as I said, we only want to propose things because we have facts that confirm that, and not because we have beliefs. We don't want to work on beliefs, we want to work on facts. For products, the situation is different. For product, we have those facts, so we know that it's technically possible to compare product groups. It's extremely challenging. I would say it is where probably the interest of industry is diverging the most from the industry of consumers/citizens. Because if you bring the concept of comparability to the extreme, then you would really have increased the level of competition between industries. And some sectors are keen in doing that. Some other sectors are definitely not. So what we have now is that for some product groups we have the comparison possible, and I would say even reliable. Some other product groups still you can have some flavor of comparison between products, but probably not enough to make a clear choice. There is still some work to be done, and that is one of the things we'll do during the transition phase on the definition of the classes of performance. There are some PEFCR, and I think Andreas is representing one of the few PEFCR that is proposing actually a method to create that granularity between the different performances. But most PEFCR decided not, so most industry decided not to go into that. We will go into that during the transition phase.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we now need to continue, but we come back to the questions you have posed, and maybe we get still more, because now Andreas Wade, who is the director, Global Sustainability Director of First Solar in Germany, he's going to present their pilot, which actually has quite interesting links to other policy tools we have discussed today, or you've made questions linked to those policy tools. And now you will hear how First Solar and their pilot sees environmental footprint and maybe the future of environmental footprint. Please, the stage is yours.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the invitation to speak to you here today here in Helsinki. Yeah, I would like to address the question which Michele touched upon a little bit also during his presentation, and present you an industry perspective on the PEF and how the PEF can enable more sustainable products. And I would specify that for our pilot with the question, how can the PEF enable more sustainable photovoltaics? So the technology used to convert sunlight into electricity. Before I start, just a couple of words on the pilot. So we have been one of the pilots which was slightly delayed, so we're going to finish in autumn. I just talked before the conference started to Michele and remembered that the first meeting of the Technical Secretariat, which involved the International Energy Agency, which involved the Solar Power Europe, the Industry Association, but also major industrial players, actually took place about 5 years ago, so on the 27th of October 2013. So it has been a fairly long journey, but I think it was worthwhile and certainly will give us the ability as industry to really go to the next level in terms of ensuring transparency on sustainability performance. And that's what I would like to explain you a little bit, and then draw the line also to other policy instruments like eco-label and eco-design, where our pilot is in a bit of a guinea pig situation, since we are, as we speak, part of a preparatory study which is ongoing to evaluate the applicability of other sustainable product policies on EU level. So this is the agenda I'm going to talk through today. So first of all, a little bit of a context. So again, taking a step back, looking at the industrial perspective, and in that case, the photovoltaic industrial perspective, to answer the question, is there actually a need for life cycle assessment and environmental footprinting in the market? And to already spoil the presentation a little bit, yes, there is. And we have seen a lot of developments over the last couple of years which are supporting that. Then the second part will be on standards and tools. And again, this kind of re-emphasizes what Michele just said. We really see the PEF and the PEFCR as a very sophisticated tool set and toolbox to use to actually measure and compare the sustainability performance, the environmental performance of a product. And then last but not least, as already mentioned, eco-design, eco-labeling and green public procurement. How can the PEF help to further level the playing field in the EU markets by using and applying that very sophisticated tool set? So coming to the market perspective. So this basically comes down for our sector into the question, how clean is your kilowatt hour, right? Ultimately, that is the question we get asked increasingly from our customers. And our customers are not only the buyers of PV modules and components which install the systems, but more and more also direct power buyers, right? So the big corporations, you probably have seen press releases from Google, Amazon, Apple, and others who are increasingly purchasing their electricity through power purchase agreements. And these customers, they certainly want to know not only of what quality and reliability the PV system is, but also what the sustainability attributes are, which are attached to that system, and ultimately to the kilowatt hour they use to produce their products or provide their services. So what we see is clearly that, you know, the overall concept of quality today not only entails the physical reliability of the components, but also the environmental performance of the components included in the system delivering that service. Why is that important in the photovoltaic industry? We have seen an exponential growth pattern over the last decade. So today we're talking about a commoditized 100 gigawatts plus market where 100 gigawatts of new systems are produced every year and put into operation. Looking forward the next 10 to 15 years, we will see terawatt growth, right? So we go another level up here to basically come to terawatts of installed photovoltaic capacity by the mid of this century. So this clearly shows how important it is to also be able to transparently compare the sustainability and environmental performance of the assets, since we're talking about really multi-million to multi-billion-dollar investments for utility scale installations, or if we look at small residential scale installations, also these installations are, you know, still quite significant investments for private households, and they last for decades. They last for 20, 30, 40 years. So it is important to enable that level of transparency. So what can we do to actually, you know, enable that comparability, to be able to provide meaningful information to support decision-making processes, be it on the sustainable finance side or be it even on the private household side? As Michele lined out, we have seen quite a few, you know, developments over the last decade, 2 decades basically, trying member states and other institutions trying to develop these methodologies. The ISO standard has been mentioned before, and then a couple of others which I'm lining out here have been developed for the specific product category of photovoltaics. And that was also one of the questions I think I have seen, you know, how is the PEFCR and the PEF actually aligning with those? And what we have done in the pilot process, obviously, is to take all those standards which are existing and making sure that there is conformance and they all align with the requirements we have defined in the product environmental footprint category rules over the last 5 years. So that's why I centered the PEFCR here in the middle, because from our point of view, it is the first tool set which really has this breadth of applicability, incorporating the different specialist approaches, but also having the political mandate to be actually used in these product policy discussions. The other one which I put on here, and that's quite interesting, also from an international harmonization perspective, is a leadership standard for photovoltaic modules which just have been published in the US, the NSF ANSI 457 standard. And interestingly, and luckily, that standard also references the PEF. Right, so also in the US we see that, you know, the effort which has been undertaken here over the last 5 years is valued, and obviously this is one of the main interests of industry, that we have a globally streamlined approach here. Yeah, how does, you know, this tool set then actually enable more sustainable photovoltaics? The tool set itself probably doesn't, right? It just provides the information needed to take policy decisions on improving the overall environmental performance. So enabling comparability of products really is the major aim and what we wanted to achieve by developing this PEFCR. You've probably seen this, you know, overlay of different policy instruments before, and I'll come to that in a bit more detail in a minute. But basically now we're in the transition phase, and for photovoltaics we're actually in the very comfortable situation to be part of a preparatory study where actually eco-design, eco-labeling, green public procurement, and energy labeling are evaluated as potential policy instruments for photovoltaic panels, inverters, and systems going forward. So obviously we have a very good opportunity here to see how can the results we have delivered in the PEF through the screening study, through the PEFCR, through the supporting studies, can actually be used to come to a policy design which helps to shift the curve towards the better environmental performance of products. The other picture which I've listed here is actually also interesting, and that refers back to the Sustainability Leadership Standard. So what we have seen as well is that this NSF ANSI standard will now become the basis for an EPEAT listing of photovoltaic modules, since it was endorsed by World Bank and other investors active in sustainable finance and asset financing, that they would really appreciate to have an EPEAT label for photovoltaic components. So that is obviously one of the things where we as industry are trying to hopefully get a streamlining as well between these international eco-labels and what will come on the European level. So, yeah, going in a bit more detail, I mean, one of the things we have done, like any other pilot, is really to, as Michaela lined out, find out the most important life cycle stages and impact categories. What you will see here, interestingly, is that some of the impact categories, which Michaela mentioned as not being fully robust yet or fully validated from a methodology point of view, are still impact categories which we have identified, right, in the pilot for photovoltaics. And the other thing which is very interesting, and that is obviously a very interesting perspective to inform a preparatory study on eco-design, eco-labeling, and green public procurement, is that what we have seen is that by far the most dominant life cycle stage for all photovoltaic panels is actually the raw material supply and the module production, which is probably a little bit surprising, but if you think about it, maybe less, because we're an electricity producing equipment, right? So the use phase as such provides benefits, whereas the production stage obviously has a major impact. So that obviously helps us now already to kind of give insights into the eco-design preparatory study to say, okay, if we have these hotspots, and each of these clusters represents one of the hotspots I just mentioned, resource depletion, toxicity, and particulate matter, what are the measures we can take in terms of sustainable product policies to address those? Again, PEF being the toolbox, making those transparent and comparable, you can basically see that, for example, if you look at resource depletion, obviously, one thing to counterbalance that is to define high-value recycling standards, right? If you're able to increase the amount of post-industrial or post-consumer recycled content in your new products, you will obviously be able to directly address the resource depletion hotspot in the life cycle of the panel. And that's something we have proven using the methodology of the PEF. So it is a clear guideline on what a potential eco-design measure could look like. The same thing is true for toxicity, again, with the caveat that the methodology still needs to be refined. We still believe that if you look at the root cause of these hotspots, which again lie in copper manufacturing, steel manufacturing, aluminum manufacturing, you again can depict potential policy measures targeting high-value recycling, increase of qualitative recycling quotas to actually tackle these hotspots. The last one really on particulate matter emissions, that is related to the supply chain of electricity. Again, we're using a lot of electricity to produce these panels. So how can we ensure that going forward the electricity mix used for production is less reliant on fossil fuels? That will be one of the levers we can use to address this hotspot. So this is just a quick overview on what we think the PEF can offer for these kind of policy discussions. So going to those again, I mean, you've seen this graph before. We're, in this guinea pig situation, which we find very positive, because we now can actually see how the results of the PEF will be included in these discussions. So this is the timeline of the ongoing preparatory study, which some of you might be aware, which is carried out by the JRC in Sevilla. We're in the midst of that process already, so it was launched in autumn 2017. We saw the first, work package, the task 1 to 3 reports being published, and there was a first stakeholder meeting where industry and other stakeholders commented. And now we're working towards the second stakeholder meeting later this year, where basically the next work packages will be delivered. And then obviously in course of next year, we will see some recommendations coming out of that preparatory study, which for the first time assesses all these instruments in one go, right? So they're not dedicated separate preparatory studies, but it's really a common study. And as you know, I mean, after the preparatory study is finished, there might be dedicated policy processes to develop these instruments, be it on the eco-label side or be it on the eco-design side, which are just taken out as examples here for the potential policy measures which could be developed after that recommendation from the preparatory study. So as you see, there's still some work ahead of us, but we think we're on a good trajectory here. And actually, the first stakeholder meeting we had in Brussels end of June this year kind of confirmed that the Commission is really taking steps to use the results from the PEF and to basically see how we can match those into the existing tool set which is there for these policy measures. Most importantly, probably the MEERP for eco-design, where you also have an LCA stage in there, where you define best available technologies based on resource use and emission profiles. So there, obviously, our interest as industry was very clear to make sure that the overlay of the PEF and the work we have done with the MEERP delivers consistent results. So as you can see here, this is copied from the minutes of the meeting. The Commission confirmed in that stakeholder meeting that the MEERP could be supplemented by data from the PEF pilot project, and in the Green Public Procurement and EU Eco-Label deliberations, the PEF would obviously form a key element. So that is reassuring for us. We know we're in the transition phase, so it's not a full policy commitment, but actually seeing that these data is being taken into consideration is obviously very, very important, and we think this could be a good example of how this could work for other product groups. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So we're in the midst of that process. We're delivering the results to the team at the JRC to basically make sure that there is alignment, not only in the EU, but then also when looking at the international dimension with the leadership standard on the EP side, that the same kind of toolbox is used to measure and assess the environmental performance. With that, let me quickly summarize what I wanted to present to you today. So again, re-emphasizing the point, we clearly see a market demand for this kind of information. It is a key differentiating factor for a producer of photovoltaic panels and systems if he can provide this validated and comparable information for his product. Because it is actually factored into bankability discussions. It's factored into de-risking these long-term assets for the buyers. So that is the one point. The second point, which I wanted to put emphasis on, is really the need for globally harmonized tools and standards. What we have seen with the PEF, with the PEFCR, the alignment already with the leadership standard and hopefully the alignment with the policy tools which are going to come over the next couple of years are very promising and strongly welcomed by the industry and will actually enable a level of comparability and transparency which hasn't been seen before. And Michele mentioned the proliferation of labels. This is certainly not what we want. We want to have a common standard which is applicable and which actually offers that that level of comparability and reassurance as well. And then last but not least, work in progress on eco-design, eco-labeling, green public procurement and energy labeling for PV modules, inverters and systems. So there we obviously are looking forward to continue the cooperation with the JRC and with the other stakeholders to hopefully come up with a very good preparatory study and then very meaningful policy recommendations which will help to enhance the sustainability of photovoltaics going forward in the European Union. With that, I would like to thank you and look forward to your questions and the discussions.
Michele Galatola, can I ask you to come on the stage? So now we have around 20 minutes time for discussion and comments and ideas. And we already have some questions on the table, but please make also comments in live or questions in live, because now we have both the person behind the footprinting methodology, but also an enterprise, a Chinipiki, testing the methodology and how to use it in different tools and how to improve the products they are producing. But Joachim Judel, do you have some key questions or comments from the Slido table?
Well, I would have only two technical questions regarding the last second presentation asked by our listeners, participants. So maybe we can first go through those and then we can move to the general discussion.
Yes.
So the first one was what is the reference product in case of photovoltaics to which it is compared? That's a simple one, I guess.
Yeah, that's it's a simple one to answer. It's not a simple construct. So the reference product we have taken in the technical secretariat is a virtual product. So it's not a real photovoltaic panel, but what we have done is we have looked at all the commercially available technologies, which are 5, and then we have looked at the market shares and weighted each individual technology according to their market share to compose a representative product to compare to. So it's basically a virtual photovoltaic panel composed of all the technologies available, weighted by market share, and that's kind of the reference we use to compare products to. And the unit of analysis, just to answer that question as well, is the kilowatt hour of generated electricity. So that's how we, compare.
Thank you. And the second one was, I'm not sure if I totally got it, but somebody would like to get a clarification on this, that Michele mentioned that electricity input was calculated as a grid mix. So how will photovoltaics PEF communicate with other PEFs? Do you have an answer to that, or maybe Michele?
Not sure I fully understand the question, so maybe Michele can also weigh in after that. I mean, obviously the grid mix is taken as an input stream in the supply chain of electricity, depending on the location where you produce. Obviously, and that's kind of, one of the political implications of why we as photovoltaics industry have started this pilot 5 years ago, is that it can be wished for that at some point we will be able to quantify not only the kilowatt hour coming of photovoltaics, but also the kilowatt hour coming of any other electricity generation technology with a PEF methodology, so that we actually can compare kilowatt hours, from different technologies. We're not there yet, but hopefully at some point in the future this might be the case, and maybe that's part of the answer to the question.
Thank you.
Sorry. And so now the floor is yours, and Ari is having a microphone, so please raise your hands if you have further questions, both on the methodology, but also about your ideas, how you think. Could you see product environmental footprint as a methodology or policy tool for your enterprise, or how do you see as an expert or as a sort of customer or buyer, how do you see environmental footprinting? So please also comments on your vision. How could this methodology or policy tool be taken on board? How should it maybe be developed more? So please, ideas. Please, Elin, and then present yourselves when you start with your question.
Yeah, Elin Eriksson at IVL in Sweden. How do actors outside Europe on the marketplace and also other actors, how do they receive this? What's your impression?
So I guess it was to me. Maybe you can ask as well, but answer as well. So our secretariat was internationally representative. So we had players from China, we had players from the US. My company is a US company. We had major European players. And what we've seen, and I mentioned that we have a commoditized market, so we have a handful of players which are producing the bulk of the products available on the market, that they're all welcoming that tool and the standardization happening in that space, right? So I see that that there was a need to be able to compare and to be able to provide that information, like very similar to other standardization areas like electrotechnical safety and so on. You want an international alignment on certain standards, so the PEFCR is welcomed in that regard as well. Obviously, more welcomed by the front runners, so the companies which are doing more and want to differentiate on environmental performance. But ultimately, what I sense from my discussions in the US, but also here, but also in Asia, is that referencing the PEFCR is actually happening everywhere, right? Like the NSF example shows, but also in Australia and Asia, people are looking into these to kind of see, okay, let's take it as a template.
Yeah, as Andreas said, I mean, historically, it is a well-known trend, and when something happens in Europe, sooner or later that spreads around the world, at least for environmental issues. We have seen that with REACH, we have seen that with other big things. So I would say that there is attention and interest from all over the world. Some indicators of that is that we have already been twice to Geneva to report back to WTO. Because of course there are some countries that sees this as not so hidden attempt from Europe to establish new trade barriers for products based on environmental features. And actually we went there to explain that rather the contrary, this could be a tool to demystify, as I was mentioning, for example, for food, some of the preconcept that there are about products coming from developing countries. There the issue is, if there is one issue, is more a capacity building issue in developing countries, so their capability of producing information that is up to the standards that we require in Europe. There is surely an interest in Asia. In August I was invited by the Chinese government for a bilateral meeting with the Ministry of Environment there in Beijing and Hefei. And clearly things are happening there, usually more silent than in Europe, but they are happening, and they are referring to our method. They have already translated the methods. They are planning to build a Chinese database which is EF compliant, so they are setting up the things to be ready whenever there is a legislation, so they can be part of it. Again, for us more the issue is the verifiability of the information, but I mean we'll get to that. So for sure there is a lot of interest, and we have seen, for example, during the pilot phase, there were some shadow pilots, what we call shadow pilots, so other countries doing exactly the same work, but without being fully recognized. One was, for example, in Thailand for the poultry sector, and we know that there's been a lot of work, and still there is a lot of interest, for example, in Central America with relation to coffee production, for example.
So So are there more questions? Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Anna-Maja Westman. I'm representing the European Pulp Industry Sector Association. Just wondering that there'll be a presentation about that in the afternoon, but are you coming out with some guidance for communication on this PEF, and when is that due?
I guess that's for me. No. We are not coming with the guidance for communication because it was decided to postpone that to any future legislation, if and when there will be a future legislation of that. Of course, there has been work done on communication. The Commission has done work in collaboration with industry. There is a communication report available on our website that is showing the outcomes of the work done. So there are hints there on what seems to work, what seems not to work. We will continue working on communication. We have already budgeted for the next year, so we will continue doing experiments on that. I know that some member states are, for example, using the LIFE project, so it's a funding source from Europe, to set up wide communication tests. This time, not so much looking at the issue of how to communicate, because there I think there is already quite some knowledge. One of the interesting issues that now we want to explore more is if there is a behavioral change related to that. And there are not so many experiences done on testing how the citizens are changing their behavior when exposed for a consistent period of time to the same messages. Usually are one-shot experiments that give some information, but sometimes limited information. Of course, we know that industry have that information in their marketing offices, but of course they are not so keen to share that with us. So we plan to do more work in that direction, but no guidance for now.
There's a question from the audience from Slido.
Yeah, I could summarize a couple of questions into one. They have been appearing repeatedly. Michaela has already talked at this party about it, but many people are apparently interested in knowing about the importance of PEF method in the coming EU product policy, how PEF is related to the eco-design directive, and also one question related to the package that European Commission presented in May, which is a compilation of measures to finance sustainable growth. So how can PEF be, if there is a role for PEF in that respect?
So maybe I can answer the question on eco-design, since we are one of the pilots which are in the midst of the eco-design process, and we have been looking into the preparatory study. So from what we learned with the interaction with the JRC, and obviously reading through the eco-design directive, there obviously is the established MEERP methodology, which is the eco-design evaluation tool for energy-related products. So the JRC explained to us that they're obviously still bound to use that methodology, but at the same time, and that's one of the things which probably will define how in future the interaction will happen, they will take the results from the PEF. We have shared the LCA model with them, as well as the screening study, as well as all the other material we have developed over the last 5 years, so that they can benchmark and modify the MEERP to the extent to achieve consistent results, right? So I think that's kind of an experiment which is going on as we speak, and I think the outcome of that, and I know there's one other pilot, and I don't remember which one, which is in a similar situation at the batteries, exactly. I think these two product groups will probably define a little bit how the interaction will happen, and then will help to come up with policy recommendations at the end. I mean, that's also the result of the preparatory battery study. So that's where we see the link, and we obviously see a lot of benefit in having done this exercise, because we're now in a very comfortable situation to present very robust and verified data to the JRC, which otherwise would have probably not been the case, especially from the life cycle inventory side, the data quality requirements, all these things, the validation which happened. So that is certainly one thing where we see a benefit for the eco-design.
I think there's still part of the question that need to be answered, so I will complement the answer. Just to complete maybe on the eco-design, let's keep in mind two things. The first one is that eco-design is working. I mean, it is one of the policies that we have implemented in Europe that is really delivering the results that we wanted when we wanted to work on the energy using and energy related products. So I mean, before changing something that is working, we have to really carefully think. Now, of course, there is room for improvements, and as Andreas mentioned in his presentation, the eco-design process entails several tasks and several steps, and the environmental part is only one of the, I think, 7 steps that we have. And currently it is based on MERP, and there is, on the Commission side, the willingness to look into that, and we have already prepared the work to make a revision, if necessary, of the MERP method for the in general, and we want to look into the environmental component to see to what extent the PEF works can complement and contribute to that. This will be done through the PV and even more with the batteries, because for the batteries that we are starting now, it was the explicit question, question from industry that was welcomed by DG GROW in the Commission to use the PEFCR as the starting point for the eco-design requirements. So in even more than for PVs, because of timing reasons, now that we have that work completed, we will start from the PEFCR to develop the eco-design criteria. So that is again another experiment that we are doing to see how these two can complement. On the sustainable finance, I think there was the question hinting to that. There are several things that we are now doing through the high-level expert group that was set up. Two things are, I would say, more relevant to the discussion we're having today. One is the definition of the low carbon indicators. As I mentioned briefly in my speech, already now in the stocks market, like the sustainability, Dow Jones Index and others, they have a method to create portfolio of companies, weighting them with their financial performance against their environmental performance. They are doing that mainly based on carbon footprinting methods. Where the problem, if we can call it a problem, is that each market is using a different approach for the calculation of this carbon footprinting, and again, we want to bring there some harmonization. So the Commission is considering to develop a European harmonized method to calculate this weighting system for market exchange. And what we are discussing now with the expert is to use the organizational environmental footprint and the method we have there to calculate the carbon accountancy as the starting point to develop this method. We are not trying to say just copy and paste, because we want to take into account other experiences, other realities and other needs, but there was an agreement to start from the OEF for the discussion with the expert. And actually this is something ongoing. Yesterday there was a meeting in Brussels on that, which I couldn't attend because I was here, but I mean, my team is following that. And the other, and maybe even more important for the future discussion there, is what we call the taxonomy. The taxonomy is basically a system that many policymakers would like to see implemented, because it's very simple, where basically it's kind of a big Excel file where you identify all the different economic sectors and you define what is green and what is not green in abstract. So you will say PV are greens, I don't know, coal energy production is not green, and then you would give advantageous financing conditions when lending money to the green sectors and penalizing other sectors. Now, of course, that is very straightforward as a concept. It's very, say, not granular as a concept, but it's probably what we will implement as a first stage, focusing on climate change. But we managed to convince other Commission services to keep the wider picture also to other environmental issues. In future, and for now, that we will get. We won't get anything more granular because there is urgency from the policy side to bring something to the market. In future, so I would say within the next Commission, we hope to get to the next step, which is to link the taxonomy not just to a black and white sector in or out, but to link each sector to the performance of those sectors. Because even within the same sectors, we know by fact that there are companies who are better performing than others, and we would like to link the green funding to the really good performing companies and not just to the in principle green sectors. But this is a much more complex discussion that we'll need years to bring forward. On the product policy package, it will depend on the outcomes of our internal discussion. As I said, we are investigating that. We are making simulations of how this might look like in existing policies, eco-design, GPP, eco-label, unfair commercial practices directive. But we don't exclude also the possibility, and that was already discussed in a workshop in Brussels in April, to bring forward new legislation, in particularly pointing at trying to solve the issue of misleading green claims and proliferation of labels.
Okay, thank you. Is there still some questions? Because soon we will be having lunch, and then you have a possibility also to ask questions or make comments or discuss with the presenters. And of course, in the afternoon, there will be still a lot of interesting examples, discussion, ideas on the PEF methodology and on the footprinting overall. But if there's no questions, maybe Joachim has something in his mind. There was something maybe on Slido.
I know that we are kind of close to lunch, but there are 3 questions that are very much connected to each other. I'm not sure if there is a simple answer to them, but there is an interest in PEFCRs, in the category rules, whether there will be new ones developed, and if then how they will take into account the already existing ones. And then also how are the benchmarks in the category rules created? If you can only very simply highlight the answer, and then maybe we can discuss over the lunch.
Yes, I was trying to mention during my presentation as well, we obviously take into account the existing category rules, if there are any, or other existing standards like national guidelines. I mentioned the ones from France, from ADEME, but also the International Energy Agency had a methodology guideline for life cycle assessment of PV. So these have all been taken into consideration when developing the PEFCR. That was actually the first step we did, to screen those to see, okay, what are the aspects which are important, which we have to take into consideration. And one of the things, to give you a practical example, which was clear, is that all these guidelines, for example, specify the cumulative renewable energy demand, which is needed to, basically calculate the energy payback time, which is an important metric, which is kind of a supplemental environmental information we give in the PEFCR as well, which is not taken into the impact categories, but comes out of, using existing standards and trying to take up information pieces which are not foreseen in the PEFCR. So that's an example how existing standards are being used and are being incorporated to harmonize. And then the second question on the new PEFCRs, I hope so, right? I mean, we wanted to show with the PV panels, it is workable, you can do it. And obviously the next step will be to do one for inverters and then eventually do one for systems, potentially including batteries and so on and so on. So I think this is just the first puzzle piece, which obviously takes a lot of effort, a lot of front-end loading to get there. But obviously, once the methodology is established and the path is clear, I certainly hope that other component manufacturers will embark on the similar exercise to develop PEFCRs.
Yeah, you said it all. I can only add that, in principle, if the work is well done, when you create the benchmark, all the different products belonging to that product groups are represented. Probably that didn't happen during the pilot phase because it was something new to industry and to experts, so maybe the procedure was not really well done by everybody. I mean, this is part of an experiment, so we acknowledge that. But we now have a better idea how to implement it in future. And also when we will publish the revised method, it will be more clear the difference between what an applicant needs to do when there is a PFCR and what an applicant needs to do when there is not a PFCR for that product groups, and that will also take care of, for example, new products or innovation products that are not in scope of an existing PFCR. So all this, as Andreas well said, it's a puzzle, so we got most of the pieces already in place, now we have a few extra pieces that we need to add with time.
Okay, if we then break for the lunch, and I will thank warmly both Michele Calatola and Andreas Wade for your very good speeches and talks about PEF and the future, and you were very sort of open and inspiring, so I hope you got a lot of ideas also to take back home. And I would also like to thank the group behind this event, because there's this event or conference is organized by Nordic Environmental Footprinting Group. It's a kind of a small group funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. And I would like to ask you, Cecilia, stand up. Cecilia Mattsson is the chair of the group. And then Ari Nissinen from Finnish Environment Institute has been really working hard to get you all here. And a very warm thank also to Preben Christensen, who is the coordinator for the group, who's been working months.
He has been the motor behind all.
Yeah, so, but there's also many others behind these three persons, but I will thank them for organizing the conference. And warm thanks to our guest speakers. Thank you. So now there's lunch outside, and we continue at 1 p.m.
12:45.
Sorry, I gave you too much time.
12:45, so you have 40 minutes. If you have a very special diet, go to the desk and tell your name and they will give you the special plate. Have a good lunch, enjoy the discussions.